Good morning, everybody. It's going to be a gorgeous spring day or winter day. Feels like spring. Once the fog goes away, hopefully, which it will. So anyway, this was just kind of a wonderful topic. It's one I've heard many times, but it never ceases to inspire me, and also to it's kind of confounding too. It's one of those both and type situations where it also is extremely, you have to really reach to grasp everything in this. And he makes it quite humorous. Devi Mukherjee, who's the young disciple there with Master, makes it very, very interesting. He makes a case for all of us as like, how do you understand this whole idea of God reincarnating into a physical body? And God doesn't have, he has his consciousness, he doesn't lose that consciousness, and yet here he is acting like a human being, sort of, he certainly looks like one, and Jesus was alive on this planet so many years ago. Obviously he was a reincarnation. He was the Son of God. He came from that consciousness and was that consciousness. And yet he had a human body, and he walked around like everyone else. And you can imagine nobody really recognized it. He was the Son of Man. He was born of a woman and man, and walked and talked and seemed like a man. So it's this juxtaposition. He was God in a body, and yet he was a man, a human in a body. And so this is what we're talking about here is Jesus was the light. He was God's Spirit incarnate here on the earth. And yet there was another high soul at that particular time that we talked about in this reading, was John the Baptist. And he was a very high soul too. But he had not quite accomplished that last jump into that infinite consciousness. So he was aware, but he still had his ego consciousness. So he, as I said, bear witness to the light. Jesus was that God consciousness in human form. And John the Baptist recognized that consciousness, even though he himself still had a little bit of ego consciousness. He wasn't quite there. So what is it like to be in this Christ consciousness and to function in a human body? I can't tell you how many times I've read about this and just wondered what is it like? And there's quite a few passages in the Path by Swami Kiryananda, since Swami, who was the founder of Ananda here, lived with the great Master Yogananda for 3.5 years at Mount Washington. And he made a lot of references that way, and he said, just one example was Swami was at a gathering with a lot of devotees and general public, and Master Yogananda was there welcoming everybody and being just gracious like he was. He was just a great personality that just attracted people to him. And Swami was he said quietly in the corner, and he was saying, now how can Yogananda, how can he be here interacting like a human, his consciousness here, and yet, as he said, the definition of Christ consciousness is center everywhere, circumference nowhere. It's in everything, everywhere. It's like, how can this happen? And Swami was just puzzling over this, and like I say, he's over there talking, and yet he's everywhere, and all these people, and Master obviously caught his thought, and he just quietly left his conversation. He walked over the table, he picked up an apple, and he walked over to Swami, and he gave Swami this apple, and he looked at him deeply in his eyes, Swami said. And then he just smiled, and he walked away. Swami said, he was trying to tell him that he was there in this human body, but he was also everywhere, and he could tune into that fact when he wanted to. And of course there are a lot of other examples of that too, but the best explanation I could come with, because this is difficult to understand, in this book Conversations with Yogananda, there is a passage that describes, according to Swami, the best definition or description that he've heard of this cosmic consciousness, explaining how a great soul can be everywhere and yet also individually in a body. He says, in cosmic consciousness, you are inwardly conscious of everything. Your human mind, however, must be aware of things specifically. When you yourself concentrate on one flower out of several, then although you are aware of that one flower especially, you are also aware that there are others. You see those others there, but to your present awareness, they are peripheral. The case is similar with the case of a master. He is aware of everything, everywhere, but at the same time, whatever calls for a specific human attention, since it is in his direct line of vision, he addresses that particularly. His human mind functions in a human way. Inwardly, however, his inner consciousness embraces all existence. So we don't really understand that, but hopefully we get a little hint of an understanding, because really understanding is experience, isn't it? So once we experience it, then we will know. Right now, to me, that was very helpful to understand that it's like, you know, have you ever been up to the Skagit Valley in tulip time? We have the beautiful display of tulips and daffodils, and it's just gorgeous. And you look out over this beautiful, colorful fields of flowers, and just you see waves and waves of colors and flowers. And yet, you know, you can tune into perhaps one of those flowers, and you can see that particular one. It might have something a little different, more specific that you look at, and yet you're aware of all the other flowers. But at that time, your consciousness is there. And so I can see that in cosmic consciousness, the master is able to do that. He has this peripheral awareness, but his consciousness is drawn individually, specifically, as needed. And so what is that must be like? You know, for us it's still an overwhelming thought. Would we recognize a self-realized master if that person came within us? An example, which is very clear for us that live here, is we had one of those not too many years ago, and some of us might have been even old enough to have seen this person, but certainly there are people today that did. But did they recognize that she was a saint? I'm talking about Sister Gyanamata, who lived down in the University District with her husband, and she played the part of a wife and mother. She raised a child, and she took care of her aging mother for most of her adult life. And so, of course, she went shopping, and she took walks, and she was out and about, and she went places. And, you know, how many people recognized that she was a saint? Probably no one, even her husband. Although I'm sure you realize she was quite unique. But then when she met Yogananda, it was instant. He recognized her, and she recognized him. Because it takes greatness to recognize greatness. That's what they say. And so, I know another example, Swami Kiryananda, when he was searching for his path. He didn't know what he was searching for, but he was searching. And when he read the autobiography of a yogi, he said he knew instantly that this was what he was looking for. Swami Kiryananda had a greatness in him, of course. We don't come on earth and recognize that type of greatness without having a lot of that within us. And he recognized just from reading that book. And he was, as we all know, on the next bus practically out to Los Angeles to become the direct disciple of Yogananda at that time. For it takes greatness to recognize greatness. But how do we achieve that greatness? Well, that's what we're all doing right now, aren't we? You know, we have to, we all are on a continuum. We have to start somewhere, we have to move through it, and eventually there it is. There's there's the spiritual teacher. There is what it is that we need to take those final steps. Master said, if you even want to know God, you're almost there. You know, how many lifetimes have we come back? And yet now we're here and we're almost there. Now, whatever that means, you know, how many more lifetimes, but a whole lot closer than we were when we started off, or just a whole lot. We just don't really ever know. And so the masters come to show us what it takes in order to become what it is that we want to become. And you know, what they're asking us is usually something that's a little scary. It's usually something that is going to take us beyond our comfort zone. You know, if it was easy, guess what? We'd all be back home in bliss. But you know, this is God's show. And God likes to has devotees to enjoy the show. And so, you know, he gives you some opportunities to make a lot of choices. And sometimes we make good choices and sometimes we don't. And it is scary and can be hard. And just a little story that will perhaps ring a bell to you all, but this is a kind of a scenario, you might say, a person that likes to go mountain climbing and scrambling, and you know, I can kind of relate to this story. Anyway, they just like to get off and you know, just go wherever they want to go. And you know, this person decided he wanted to climb this fairly good sized mountain, but you know, just scramble up it. And you know, as it typically happens, you know, you don't anticipate all the little challenges on the scramble. So loose rocks, and suddenly there's, you know, some rocks that you have to kind of scooch over and things like that. So it got a little steep towards the end, and he was reaching for some handholds and things. And all of a sudden he realized that, you know, he was pretty stuck. He had a handhold on a little piece of a clump of bush. But he couldn't really go up anymore. He couldn't find any other way to go up. But he really knew that going down would have been next to impossible too. Down is a lot harder than going up. So he was stuck there, and he thought, wow, is there anyone around here? You know, I've got to get some help. And so he started calling for help, you know, help, I need help. And then he listened and he heard this small voice kind of booming up above him. And he said, Jack, is that you down there? And Jack said, yeah, that's me. Who are you? He said, well, I'm God, and I can help you. You just have to do what I say. And Jack was kind of wondering about this, you know. Really? Is this really? Okay, he said, Lord, I'll do what you say. What do you want me to do? I need help. And the Lord said, okay, Jack. He said, just let go. And Jack looked around. He said, Lord, just let go? And the Lord said, yes, Jack, just let go. I will catch you. And Jack looked down and saw the distance down and looked up. He couldn't do that. And then he said, hey, he said, is there anyone else up there? But you know, have you ever been in a situation like that? Where, you know, you feel kind of stuck. You don't want to go backwards, but you don't want to go forwards. It's too scary. And you don't want to perhaps do what you kind of know you should do, but if you do it, you know, that's even more scary. Well, I think we all know what we're talking about here. Because when we choose God and say we want to come home, then that's what we need to do. And you know, we have to, this is, and another reference is a story, it's a story, but it's one of the passages from Whispers from Eternity, about the sculptor who was sculpting an elephant, and he was asked, well, you know, how can you, this is a rock, a big rock, you know, where's the elephant? And the sculptor said, well, the elephant is inside the rock. And all I have to do is chip away everything that's not the elephant. So here we are. Here's our divinity right here, and here's our rock. And Divine Mother is chipping away whatever it is that's not divine. And of course, it's not a physical thing that we're talking about here. It's all those pieces of us that need help. That's why we're here. That's why we read scriptures. That's why we pray. We need help. And yet, when the help comes, Jack, I'm here, jump. Do we jump? Are we able to make that leap of faith? And sometimes we can't take the giant steps, but we can take the little baby steps. And if you can just take some little baby steps, but I guarantee there are times when there's an awful big giant step that you have to take. And that giant step sometimes can be the hardest thing to do, but when you take it, it's worth it, and you know it, because that sense of God's presence suddenly becomes even clearer. It's right there. It becomes revealed in a way that you hadn't ever seen before. There's a Jyotish and Devi have these wonderful series of books that they've been putting forth. They're called The Touch of Light, and then they've got The Touch of Love, The Touch of Joy, The Touch of Peace. And they're weekly blogs that they write. And they're so wonderful because they're short and they are so specific with an example and the lesson. And so many of those examples and lessons are right where we're at. And you can relate to them. And I know one in particular that relates to what we're talking about here, this whole experience that we're all going through. It has to do with a family that they were watching butterflies as they were hatching out of their chrysalis. Moths come from cocoons, butterflies come from chrysalis. They're caterpillars, and then they go into their little stage where they develop into the next stage, and then they come out. So they were watching these little chrysalises, which are hanging on the little branch, a couple of them there, and they were watching. You can actually, I've seen this, you can actually kind of see some movements inside those brown chrysalises. As they get ready to come out, they become more opaque. And they could see the movement, and there were two little children there. They were cheering for it, and you could see the little chrysalis started to open up, and it would open, and a little piece of the butterfly would come out, or maybe a leg or an arm, and then suddenly, when the wing comes out, and it's all crumpled, and then suddenly it unfolds, and the kids were cheering it on. And, well, this struggle went on, watching this butterfly emerge for over a half hour. And the kids were totally immersed in it, but they could see how much the butterfly had to struggle. Every little thing was an effort to get out the next appendage and big the head, and the whole back would come out. And finally, the whole thing popped up on its legs, and it stood there, and the wings would open up and flutter. And of course, the cheers would go up, and the butterfly flew away. And what a success story. I've never seen a butterfly, but I've seen a dragonfly come out of its little nymph stage, which is like the chrysalis. I watched that, and it took over a half hour to watch that metamorphosis. It was fascinating and enlightening. And yet, here this other butterfly, the other one was starting to come out now too. And the little kids said, well, Mom, they said, let's help this guy. There's such a struggle for that butterfly to come out of his chrysalis. And so they had very carefully cut into the chrysalis and opened it up a little bit more, to make it easier. And sure enough, the butterfly was able to come out a lot more quickly. Didn't have to have that long struggle of one thing and another and another and another. It just started to kind of like popped out. And kids were cheering, the butterfly, yay. And the butterfly kind of wobbled and wobbled and wobbled, and then it fell over dead. It didn't make it. And of course they were very disappointed, but what's the purpose of this? The story simply was the struggle. The struggle of that butterfly to emerge from its cocoon, emerge from its caterpillar state. It had to struggle. It had to get out of that casement. We've got this encasement. All these things that we think we are, things that we learned, the way we've learned how to behave, the reactions that are just automatic in our life. We don't even know we're there. We have to remove those. And it takes a struggle. It takes a struggle because that is when we understand and realize what it really is, the way we are and the way we can be. That's when the doors start to open. So the struggle is important. The struggle for us are the challenges that we face. And I know it's a continuum. The whole spiritual path is a continuum. The beginning of the path when you come on can be very uplifting and so exciting. And that's wonderful. But then you kind of dig in. At some point, I remember I thought, oh, wow, I'm just going to have, I'll be seeing all these wonderful things as I meditate here. But after a while you realize that you're in this for the long haul, more than likely, for most of us. And that's when we, in particular, start to talk about these struggles, because you have to purify what it is that's holding you back. And that means one leg at a time, one wing at a time, All this happens if we are willing to let it happen. If we hang on to that rock and we don't let go, then we're going to hang there until we do. So sooner the better in that respect. So, I know I've been figuring out, in 38 years now I've been on the path, which is just a blip in time. It's nothing. But it's still, for me, what it is. And, I remember the struggles. Still have the struggles, I don't stop. But it's different now. It's like the struggles are there, but it's like I'm not accepting them as personally as I did before. It's almost like standing back from the whole scene that's going on and just allowing it to unfold. And just, the pain can still be there, but it's not like it's the end-all, wear-all, because I know that, let's just get this over with so we can move on. And it really is. It can get easier, even though the tests probably aren't any easy. It's just the way we approach them. And so the flow goes on, and we continue to grow, and we get stronger. And eventually, and God knows when, that time will come when we spread our wings and we fly, and we are that butterfly, because that's what we were made to be. That's our destination. I'll always remember a trip to Portland that I took back when I was managing a Swiss bookshop. And we had back then we had these New Age fairs that used to go on. We had them in Seattle too. And they were most fun, and you got a lot of people with a lot of background and that kind of stuff. And I always remember I was there, and this woman came up to me, and out of the blue, I didn't know her at all, and she looked at me and she stopped right in front of me and she said, you're a very old soul. And I thought, I was still pretty new on the path, and I was, in my early 40s, a little sensitive to age at that point, but, still, I didn't consider myself old. But she said, you are a very old soul. And I said, how do you know? He said, she said, I can just tell. And I thought, this is back when, I thought psychics were kind of woo-woo-y, and, I just kind of put it aside. But then again, she came out of the nowhere and she left out of nowhere. I never saw her again. Who knows? Why did that happen? But I was always wondering, maybe there was something there. All of us, to even be sitting here, we have to have come back to this earth plane many times. We've already gone through a lot of that stuff you see other people going through right now, and you go, God, how can they do that? That's really dumb stuff. It's just no way is that going to work. Well, we've gone through it. So, we're old souls. We've come back a lot. And as Master said, when you want to know God, you're almost there. So here we are, getting closer, getting closer, and knowing that, until your last breath, you still are going to be that child of God. It doesn't matter whatever happens in your life. Give it this lifetime, Don't hang back from the challenges. Give it this lifetime. And a story, I think I've told this before, an 80-year-old woman in Tacoma, Washington, when Master was alive and he was giving lectures in this Seattle, Tacoma area. She went to his classes, and she was 80, and she hadn't any sense of, any of this. And yet she was so taken by the teachings that within 3 years, Yogananda said, she practiced these teachings completely all the time for 3 years. And she was liberated in 3 years. So why not? We're a child of God. We're a child of eternity. It's our destiny to come home. It's what we want. We want that joy. We've got the teachings. We've got a guru. We've got a master that's there working with us, doing so much more than we even can imagine for us. Why not? Why not now? Why not this lifetime? Why not do it? The affirmation that we had this morning on energy, I'll repeat it because it is so applicable to what I'm talking about. It was on energy. It said, "Within me lies the energy to accomplish all that I will to do. Behind my every act is God's infinite power." Behind my every act is God's infinite power. Let's make that choice, and let's become that butterfly. Thank you.